So welcome everybody, our first meeting of the new year. I hope that the new year has gotten off to a good start for everyone. And we're really excited today to have our guest speakers. Sherry will do the introductions in just a moment. Sydney, we have a new member to our committee here. So hi there. So this is great. And some other folks from CPA proper. Wonderful to have you all joining us. So I think without further ado, Sherry, if you want to introduce our speakers.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm just going to ask people if they're on to please mute.
Yeah.
Anybody, because we can hear your background noise. And okay, so I'm really happy to have two wonderful people joining us today from different disciplines that work with kids. So we've got our own Dr. Derek Fenwick. Derek, are you, can we see you?
Yeah, I'm on. Hi, everyone.
Hey, Derek, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Derek's gonna, be our co-panelist today. He has great expertise on working with LGBTQ youth, understanding their unique issues and their unique perspectives and what it's like working with boys and young men today. And then we've got Dan Blanchard, who is an educator in Connecticut. He's currently working at the Alternative High School in New Britain. He's been an educator for, is it 30 years, Dan?
Just about. It's really close to 30. Yeah, it's about 25, 26 in New Britain, and then I was in a couple places before this. So yeah, very close to 30. Yeah, so years go by fast.
So Dan, in addition to being an educator, he works a lot with the Connecticut Teachers Federation and designing or discussing and help creating some of the most innovative programs that we have in Connecticut. He's also been a junior Olympic wrestler or champion wrestler and a coach for wrestling. He is also incredible parent, educator, and an author of one of the best books I've read about young men and raising young men, boys, called The Storm. And he has a passion for storytelling, which is such a great way to communicate with kids and the power of story and the power of one's own story and being the hero in your life. And then his most current book is A Conversation on Education. And this is really about how teachers and paraeducators can work together to provide, better experiences for kids and other educators in the classroom. So I hope I did you guys justice. I know I could go on and on about your impressive backgrounds. So one of the things that I would like to start off with today is sort of an open-ended question. And I'm going to start with, if I can, I'm going to start with Derek about his work. And if you could just talk a little bit about your work at, you're at Hartford Hospital Institute of Living.
Correct.
And I'm so, and Derek is our future president of CPA. So I have to shout out to Derek for that. Thank you. Derek, I want to know what changes you've seen specifically in boys that you've worked with over the past few years, and especially, pre-COVID and now. And what are boys what issues are they coming to you with?
Yeah, thank you. I think primarily, and this has probably been consistent even before kind of COVID, is difficulty around emotions. And you're probably going to hear that a lot. And being able to recognize emotions, as a society, I think we're kind of set on that men should suppress emotions, men and boys, that we should be the tough ones, that we shouldn't have to cry. And so that's a big thing. A lot of the individuals that I work with, the young adults, the adolescents, emotions are difficult to describe for them. So I really talk a lot about, one, for them being able to label the emotion that they're going through, which is very difficult for many of them. So giving them the avenue to be able to describe the emotion, also consider the intensity of the emotion that they're going through. And something that we work a lot with is really having them either write out what their emotions are, and then over time, their ability to, I think, put it down on paper, they get a little bit more experience in understanding what that means to them. And they get a little bit of insight of like recognizing, wow, I didn't know I was experiencing this specific emotion.
Mm.
I also think kind of underlying is, we have these core emotions, really around like anger, sadness, fear, disgust. And sometimes we have these other emotions, whether it's shame, anxiety that come about, or guilt. And those can, I think, mask those core emotions. And so when we see individuals maybe expressing anger or shame or guilt, really, it may be something going back to those core emotions that are underneath that anger, shame, or guilt. And so really having them recognize that what originally was anger is now kind of internalized for you, and now it's kind of shame and depression. So really trying to uncover those core emotions for them and talking about them. But generally, that first thought is just really having them recognize, understand, and label their own emotions.
Wow, that's beautifully said. It's so important to understand that. Dan, one of my concerns along with this are the statistics and the rise of mental health problems among teenagers in total, collectively, but also about the rise in suicides among young men. So I want your take on it also, of what you see, are the biggest emotional challenges in work with the boys you work with, and how you've seen changes in their emotional functioning over the past, let's just say, 5 years.
All right, Sherry, thanks, and happy to be on the show. And as you had mentioned to the audience, I am a special education teacher in New Britain. I'm teaching the social studies classes at an alternative high school in New Britain. I've seen quite a lot over the last 25 years. I work in, one of the, let's just say, a very challenging demographic in a very challenging city, where there are all sorts of issues that our kids are facing every single day that frankly breaks my heart. I mean, that's why I went out and started writing, all the books I've written to try to help, the student population and the community, the parents, the educators, and everything else with what's going on, because it's just a big problem, and I don't really see it getting better. I mean, I think I was just recently talking to our school psychologist, and we were just talking about this, and she was telling me how like 1 in 5 children, have like some kind of diagnosable, emotional, behavioral, or like mental disorder, and I'm like, yeah, I'm like, it's probably more than 1 in 5, and if it is, and it's not, there's no signs that it's getting better. And as this stuff is going on, we're dealing with more and more budget cuts, and the more and more elimination of support staff, school psychologists, school social workers, school guidance counselors, heck, even, speech pathologists. We're losing paraeducators, teachers assistants. The budget cuts are like happening at the wrong time. And that's they're getting bigger. They're getting bigger as the problem's getting bigger, and thus there's less support, less personnel, less let's say less human touch in these kids' lives who really could use someone to bond with. And so there's less opportunities for that because of what's going on. And the teachers and the support staff that are available, that are around, the administrators, and anybody else is so overwhelmed and so stressed that, it's not, I guess, unthinkable to find, let's say, an educator who's maybe short with a student, or just frustrated with a student, because they're overburdened, overstressed, and all that as well. So, I mean, you throw all this together with what I'm seeing, there's just way too much trauma coming into our schools, our public schools on a daily basis. I mean, the things these kids are seeing, the things that they're going through, you know, what they're like, their parents many times have a lot of difficulties and are very overwhelmed, and they're not very prepared and stressed, and they're not always at their best, and this is like the normal life, the normal life, then the violence on the streets, being out to 2 or 3 in the morning. So you got violence on the streets. They come back home. They got violence in the home. They got, a lack of role models. It's just so much trauma. And it's like I said, it's like
I wanted to also ask Derek about this, because I've been in 30 years of my work, I've seen an increase in kids now bringing into session fears, anxiety about mom and dad not having a job, about finances, kids worrying about finances. They're hearing the conversation and the arguments at home, and also just, trauma in the home, fighting in the home, their parents' mental health problems. Derek, are you seeing that also?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and this was a little bit before we started, social media plays a huge impact on that as well, because they have access to all this information right at their fingertips. They're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, they're on TikTok, and they're seeing everything that's occurring, not only within their own kind of life and things that are going on with their social environments, but also everything that's going on across the country. So I think that is one huge change as well, is that everything is kind of dumped on them, and it becomes that over kind of like existential anxiety of, climate change and all these laws and bills that are being put into place. That's one common thing that I work with, specifically with LGBTQ individuals, is all the barriers that are being placed, thankfully not here in Connecticut, but across the country. And that stresses them out, and really brings about a lot of anxiety of like, what does this mean for me as I grow older? So I'm seeing that a lot. I think the trauma is a huge piece as well. The trauma around, specifically with the population that I work with, the stigma, the discrimination that society plays a part in, them not being able to feel like they can be their true selves, and identify certain ways. That leads to them having the depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation that is such increased over time. I think also the big thing that we harp on a lot is the connection piece. And I know, Dan, you talked about having that bond in a place where people, and really the boys and young individuals can have a bond with someone, because that connection is huge. So I think that social media is kind of twofold, because you can get that connection, but you can also have that avenue where these young individuals are looking at everything that's going on in the world. They also have more access to compare themselves to other individuals through social media. So it's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. So it's kind of twofold in social media. We try to get a lot of, the adolescents and young adults we work with to engage more, and have more connectedness, because that helps reduce their depression and anxiety. But, sometimes it's hard for them to engage in person, or as I like to say, in real life. They only want to engage on social media.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's one of the things I really want to talk with you and Dan about, the changing nature of relationships, how, especially boys today are viewing relationships, because we know that boys interact with social media in different ways than girls. They're on different sites. They do a lot more gaming, and they're on different sites generally. And I know that this has impacted how they view connectedness and the kind of relations they want, or how they view sex or the opposite sex, or how they view sexual growth and development as young people. Do you want, either of you guys want to address that?
I could jump in on that. This is very concerning to me. You know, what I'm seeing, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I remember watching my wife and my daughter take out this little like computer gaming controller, and they put on TV. It was like a tennis video game, and they were like, I forget what it was called, but they were like hitting the tennis ball back and forth, but it wasn't real. You know, it was on TV, and they were calling that exercise. And I thought, okay, how unique, how interesting, fun. My daughter, you know, my wife looked like they were having a great time. Their bodies were up off the couch and moving around. I thought that was great. And I'm thinking, but what's wrong with going outside and playing tennis for real? You know what I'm saying? And getting the fresh air and the sunshine and the exercise for real versus like you know, something that's on a computer or a TV. And I was like concerned about that. And then since then, I've you know, thought about what's going on with our generation of boys. And more of them are just like retreating to their bedrooms, you know, hiding in their bedrooms on their computer, on their gaming, which is usually very inappropriate. The game with the violence, you know, the nature of the violence and the nature of the sexual violence and all that stuff, the killing, the war games, all that stuff. And they're playing those video games nonstop. You know, saying they're coming in the next day, sleepy, putting their heads down on the desk, tired. And if you look at this is not just like middle school kids or high school kids. This is proceeding to be like young men that have graduated from high school, hopefully have graduated, maybe they haven't, you know, from high school. And these young men should be out in the work world, you know, making a living, becoming good, you know, civic participation in the community and all that. But instead, like they're, you know, they're not going to college. They're being passed out by the women that are going to college. And the women that are going to college, you know, they want to date, you know, men that have futures, which might be other men that are going to college, you know what I'm saying? Men that are around them going to college. So a lot of these boys are not getting dates. So they're becoming bitter toward the females. They're sitting in their rooms and they're playing video games. They're not working or they're working minimally. And
Of course.
they're
Yeah,
and you're asking about their
and-
success.
yeah.
And they're like, well, my success is that I just got a higher score today than yesterday on
Yeah.
some video game.
And
Yes.
I have spoken with the PHP and IOP,
Oh,
and
Someone's on the line.
we have both said the same thing. And
Dana,
we are all in agreement that
Dana.
she needs to get out of the house.
Dana, can you, thank you. Hey, we just heard that. I just want to make another point. You know, my practice is very diverse, but there's this concern among the kids I work with, and it's not, it could be kids in the LGBT community as well as cisgendered kids. They are spending a lot of time gaming and a lot of time on sites that give them points. You can buy points. And I have had a number of cases where they've racked up debt for their parents on gaming because they use a credit card. And that's actually what is the event that brings them to therapy, is the gaming got to that point where it started to cost the parents money. They're racking up debt. So could everyone like to, I know we're going to get ready to ask some questions, but if, you know, Derek, do you want to address just that and the gaming and the porn sites?
Yeah, so this is, I think, rampant. And even as Dan was talking, like the young adults that I see, it's staggering that they have been really since the pandemic, it's like they're stuck. They have not been doing anything for about 2 years. They're sitting at home. They're not wanting to get a job. They are literally isolating themselves. And that, I think, is furthering their anxiety and stress around engagement in real life. That they're stuck. They don't know how to talk to people. And so that's consistent. So it's really hard, especially in the intensive outpatient program that I work with. It's trying to, those small steps to even just move them along a little bit. But they don't even want to do that. They just want to sit at home, isolate. And a lot of their relationships, they'll talk about, oh, I'm dating this individual, or I'm talking to my friends. And then the more that you dive into it, it's friends that are across the country, in different parts of the world that they haven't even met in real life. So they're not even, you know, talking and engaging and going out in person. They're just only talking to these people on gaming websites. That is their whole life. And it's a real struggle, honestly.
So Barbara, time goes fast here. I'd love to hear some of our members today participating and what their questions are, or comments, or experiences. Love to hear from you. All right, Lisa Backus, his hands up. I see you.
Hi, guys. So I guess there's like 500 things that I could bring up right now, because I think this is so interesting and important to be talking about, but I'll stick with a more like action-oriented question, which is, it does feel like there are so many untapped resources that we potentially have. I mean, I don't know, this was like a post I saw online somewhere, but like there's a country, you know, that has like little kids or nursery schools integrated into nursing homes. I spent time sitting next to a plane befriending this like retired health PE teacher who is just so passionate about kids and helping them. And he's not doing anything right now, but he would love to be involved somehow in helping, right? Like forget like a national draft, but like a national, every senior has someone they mentor that year for an hour a week or an hour, like why are we not doing this? I know there's a lot of like, you need to have background checks to work with kids and all of that stuff, but just, I don't know, what are your thoughts on figuring out how to tap into some of these resources that we potentially have?
Yeah, that is a great question, and I'm glad you brought that up. I think so many of the resources, again, were really shut down during COVID, and some of them haven't been brought up. And then there's the legal issues that you brought about. I find like the volunteer opportunities for kids have narrowed since COVID. And the volunteer opportunities were one where they could feel empowered and make important connections and create mentors, find mentors. Anyone else want to jump in on that, or have something?
Yeah,
to
one of the opportunities where there's a real need is the Guardian Ad Litem program. I don't know how it works in Connecticut, although I know it exists. But in Florida, I've been able to work with 2 families of kids, and I've had a number of families over the last several years that I've been working as a Guardian Ad Litem, and happy to say, I've probably had about 12 kids get adopted through this program.
Wow.
Dan, were you going to respond?
Yeah, it was funny. I had a really interesting conversation yesterday in my history classes. And let me frame this with saying that I believe kids need to be busy doing something productive. Okay. So this is where I'm going with this. Yesterday in my history class, I was teaching the kids about Franklin Delano Roosevelt's CCC, or the Connecticut Civilian Conservation Corps, that took place in Connecticut. And I hope I'm not getting too far out of the box on this for everyone. But as the more and more I talked about it, the more and more the kids said, that sounds pretty neat. Like, you know, we had that program here in Connecticut, and, you know, I talked about the boys working hard. It wasn't for girls at the time. In the 1930s, it was for the boys, you know, working hard, fresh air, exercise, sunshine. You know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt talked about how they all put on about 12 pounds during their stay at these camps of working hard, and how he'd like to lose 12 pounds. I mean, everybody laughed. But I said to the kids, just like, you know, I was just curious. I said, listen, I know it's real hard for you guys to get jobs this day. It wasn't like this when I was a kid. I can go down the corner store, get a job, maybe pump gas at the corner gas station, whatever, right? Flip burgers, whatever. I said, but today it's very difficult for kids to get jobs. So I said to them, I go, if we had something like the CCC available today to you kids, would you kids do it? And I figured most of them would say, no way, I'm not doing that, blah, 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 right? But surprisingly, a lot of them said, yeah, there was something around like that could, you know, give me a few bucks and, you know, get me out there working in the community, you know, I would do it. And I was really surprised by that. So yeah, the chances of that coming back are like slim and none, even though the New Britain mayor suggested it about 5-6 years ago. But, you know, I think that there's something there, you know what I'm saying? I think that I know kids need to be involved, maybe working hard and being proud of doing something. And I think that even though maybe we've dismissed them saying that they don't want to do this, they want to be just playing video games, maybe they do want to do this. Maybe they do want to be out working hard, maybe making things or cleaning up their community or beautifying the community or just doing something where they can say, like, I'm proud of that. I mean, I remember one summer I was putting up fences, and for years, during my teaching years, I was putting up fences the first couple of years. And for years, when I drive through different towns, I would go out of my way to drive by an area of a fence that I put up to see if it was still there. And it was. And I was like, cool, that fence is still there. I'd be telling my kids about it. I put up that fence a long time ago, right?
Well-
So, I mean, I think that something like that would be good for our children, our students.
So Dan, thank you. Before I get to Lainey, Rosia Chang put up a couple of great links in the chat on some opportunities and programs in there. Thanks so much. Lainey, do you want to go ahead and share your comments?
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering, I mean, the issue of the kids being stuck on the gaming and especially getting into the pornography, do we actually have any programs or groups that we're running for kids that are really becoming really pretty much addicted to some of the porn? Because they have nothing else. So that's their stimulation and it's their anxiety reducer. So what, do we have anything, any programs to refer kids to for that?
Gee, Lainey, thank you. So
You're welcome.
thank you. In 2018, I co-founded Positiva Teens, and we do workshop and webinars to schools and community groups on how to disengage from the internet. We teach kids what the internet does to the brain, how these sites work, how they capture you, how the algorithms work, which is really interesting, and then teach them cognitive behavioral skills and positive psychology skills to change the way they're thinking about gaming and changing the way that they can act to get what they really want out of their lives. So that's one. There's a group in Connecticut, Game Stoppers. You may have worked with that.
Mhm.
So yeah, so that's they actually have a outpatient kind of program, and they do workshops and webinars, and they do therapy. I know that some of the addiction centers now are starting to have residential programs for kids, for teens that are addicted to gaming. If anyone has any other resources, please put them in the chat or comment on it. It'd be really helpful.
I just had a clarification around that. Is that in person? Has it always been in person, or is it a hybrid or virtual? Kind of ironic if it, it is virtual, but what is the format of those kind of services?
The Game Stoppers, I referred someone to them, and they were, it was during COVID, so it was virtual. But then I also had someone in the latter half of COVID that got to go, that did it in person. So if anybody, I'm going to look online and post the link and everything. I mean, do you have like kids that are even in session that want to be on their phone during session?
Oh, yeah. Sherry, do you know if any of them are groups that are being run? Because I think sometimes kids, doing on their own is one thing, but doing a group sometimes can be more effective for some of this stuff.
Yeah, there was actually, now I'm trying to think the name. There was an in-house program. Lenny, you might know of the doctor in Connecticut that was involved with this, that actually had an inpatient therapy center for this.
No.
All right, I will look it up. I will put it up and put it on the board. Here's one of the complexities. Not all teens are the same. We've got a lot of neurodivergent teens that are very easily addicted to gaming, and it's hard to get them off. Okay. And a good resource, if you're interested in, working with neurodivergent teens, and teens that are, on the spectrum, or have, significant learning differences in their gaming is differentbrains.org. They're out of, that's Dr. Happy Reitman from Boston. He's a neurologist. I found that differentbrains.org has been a good resource on that. Anyone else have any questions while I look this up?
I'd just like to mention that this meeting has actually been something of an eye opener for me because I was dimly aware of this problem. But here in Florida, you would think that the only thing that's been going on in the classroom has been political indoctrination. So we're going to stop that by indoctrinating the kids in the opposite view of things. And now it's at the point where teachers are having to cover up all their books in their classroom and make them inaccessible to the kids until they get vetted by the powers that be. And of course, we have a huge fight going on with the new college, which has been a liberal, at least considered to be liberal college, where I think, as I see it, the motto is that teachers are not to stand in the way of the students' learning. That's an old quote. But now the governor's appointed people have taken over the board there, and there's going to be like a complete changeover in the whole philosophy, and they're going to make it like another Hillsdale. So things are changing in Florida, but there's no mention of any of these kinds of problems in the news media, even in the liberal news media. And so I think we need to really be looking at this down here as well as up in Connecticut.
What else are others seeing in their practice? Or I know, Lisa, you said there was a number of things that you were concerned about. Was there other issues you wanted to bring up?
I mean, I think a lot of it is just offshoots and philosophical musings that might end up driving me crazy because it's just so hard to change on a systemic level, some of this stuff, right? So I think a lot of the stuff about just we're such a kind of fear-based, avoid shame topics, and a lot of that I think for men, like Derek was talking about, are sort of all the emotions under the anger. And it has just, like, I've worked with boys and men, just I see it so often, them coming in for behavior issues or aggression or outbursts, and we label it as anxiety, and we try to identify what they're trying to get out of the anger, and it helps and it works and they feel heard. And so I think there's so much there to be done, and I'm glad that we're sort of moving that way as a society. But it's just, I see that a lot over and over again, and it's hard because I feel like even in schools and all of us, we're still not totally caught up on being able to support that. It's seen more as a behavior problem than the underlying. So I don't know if that's so much a question, just kind of following up on what Derek was saying, and like 100% agree that that's a big issue.
Lisa, along with what you brought up, I want to just ask Dan, I've mentioned in this forum that the statistics for Connecticut about the utilization of mental health care resources in schools is very interesting. And it seems that, we have our schools in Connecticut are the #1 mental health care provider to children in the state. And that's something that's really interesting. And is that, part of it's, a sociology problem. Part of it is not being insured. Maybe you're an immigrant, you're afraid to go to a doctor or physician, or there's a lot of stigma about it. But you've probably seen this, how much mental health care it's now something that's the teachers have to deal with, your school psychologists have to deal with, and it's, the services aren't there to provide the amount of care that's needed.
I would fully agree. Again, I mean, if I can go back and talk about those budget cuts that have been, it seems for years, there's been budget cuts, and we just don't have like the school's guidance counselors, social workers, uh, the psychologists on staff, the partnerships that we used to have. Uh, and so, another thing is being laid on the shoulders of the teachers. And I would say that we probably have a generation right now of some of the most educated, capable teachers that this country has probably ever seen. And yet, if you look, uh, test scores are not really going up. Student performance is not really going up. We're having things now like life skills classes where we're given SEL lessons, social emotional learning lessons, and life skill classes. That's another thing that I teach now. Along with teaching my social studies classes and doing the special education work, I also do a life skills class on social emotional learning lessons. So we're asking more and more and more of the teachers and the educators within the system, and overwhelming many of them. I don't know if I hate to use this word, but stressing them out. Teachers are getting overburdened, overworked, stressed out, and then that's what the students are looking at. When they're in the classroom, they're coming in from their own set of overwhelming circumstances and coming into the classroom with their own anxieties and their own problems. And they're, when a teacher teaches, the teacher's on stage. I always say I do 5 shows a day, and they can see every single little emotion on my face, all day long. And if I've got like this stressed out, anxiety ridden face, that doesn't exactly put the students at ease when they're in my classroom or any of their teachers as they're reading the faces of the teachers. So again, there's less support. I talked before about the trauma more than ever, the trauma. And me working in New Britain, I work in a very Hispanic community here where it's not considered to be macho for the boys to share their anxieties or concerns or worries or any of that stuff. So you got the whole machismo thing that you got to overcome here in the Hispanic community that I work in. And that's just adding up to more and more and more mental health issues, and sadly with all of this stuff compounded, what I am seeing over the years, and of course, a lot of us know this was fast forwarded during the COVID, but what I'm seeing over the years, and particularly with the men, I would say all of them, but definitely particularly with the males, is that, I'm seeing like a less and less capable male coming through our school systems and graduating, academically less capable, emotionally, socially less capable. And my fear is that, we're going to eventually have these 40-year-old people out in our society that may be chronologically age 40, but still emotionally, socially age 14. And they're the ones that are going to be raised in the next generation when they're stuck at like an emotional, social level of age 14, even though they may be in a 40-year-old body. Yeah, it's a concern.
Lainey, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, there are 2 things. Number one, I can't agree more, Dan. I think we are raising some kids who, well, they don't have very good coping skills. And some of it is the world, and some of it is their parents who do everything for them and don't allow them to experience and figure out what does it mean to fail, because we learn a lot from failure. But one of the interesting things, we're talking about boys and their emotions and how difficult traditionally it is. And I don't know how many of you have watched the Netflix documentary Stutz. It breaks every boundary imaginable in therapy, but it's really fascinating because you have Phil Stutz, who is, I don't know, for those of you who don't know, he's a psychiatrist with Parkinson's disease. He's probably in his late 60s, somewhere in there. And Jonah Hall, who is actually a filmmaker, decides to make a film about his psychiatrist. And in the end, it actually turns into more of a co-therapy engagement where these 2 men are sharing so much. Now, if it weren't a therapy situation and one wasn't a psychiatrist, it's fascinating. I mean, in terms of being a therapy session and what clients might see and think that this is okay to do is kind of very interesting. But it just is really fascinating to watch how these two men actually begin to communicate about their emotions. And it's a wonderful example of men making themselves vulnerable. And even though it, you know, in terms of therapeutically, it's scary in some ways, but the two men are healthy enough that they survive this. I don't know. Did anybody else see this documentary? Nobody's yet. If you haven't, go watch it.
Beginning of it. Yeah, I've seen the beginning of it. I haven't seen all the way through. Yeah, it's interesting.
It is interesting. It's about an hour and a half. And although you will cringe on some of the things, it is worth watching through till you get to the end.
I will also just kind of going off that real quick. I haven't seen this yet, but I can put it in the chat for individuals. It's a documentary that won Best Documentary Feature at the Tribeca Festival. It's called The Cave of Dalam. And really it's about this kind of center in Detroit where he is working with Black young men. And really he thought at the beginning that he needed to kind of instill more discipline in these individuals and these young men, but they needed more love. So he really helps confront them around their repression of emotions, being able to be a little bit more disciplined and doing different things, but also challenging the notion of emotions for these young men, trying to make them better individuals. So I'll put that in the chat for individuals. I think you do have to buy it on ESPN Plus, but I've seen the trailer and it looks really, really good about being able to kind of help these young boys become men and helping them work around this emotion, abandonment, and fears that come with growing up.
I think we could have, I think someone, we had a similar a series or video on mass murderers, right? We had and what we're seeing with so many young men, I had one touch my community in Florida in 4 years ago next month, are, guys being labeled as incels. I don't know, Derek, do you want to explain what that is, or?
You go ahead. Haven't heard that.
Oh my God. So these are guys that have a lot of video activity and they've been rebuffed or rejected by potential romantic partners. And they have a very active fantasy life on social media sites. And they're very angry because they're not perceived as being attractive. And sometimes the insult or the rejecting behavior is even done on a public platform like Facebook. Okay. So this has, some of these guys, and the guy in Utah, for example, was somebody that had been rebuffed a number of times virtually by girls he was interested in. But this was a guy that spent hours and hours gaming, hours and hours trying to make a romantic connection or a sexual connection online.
Incel is I think it's involuntary celibate. So
Yes.
It's like the idea of like the guy, the stereotypical idea would be like the gamer in his basement who like wants to have a life and women in his life, but doesn't because many reasons probably.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, that's a whole topic into itself, because this is a problem with a virtual society. You're connected, but not connected. We're connected more than ever before in terms of technology, yet isolated more than ever before, and that's impacting our kids' development.
And Sherry, if I can jump in on this, when you have a faction of society, a particular, a sizable group of young men, whether they're teenagers or in their early 20s, and they are angry and uneducated, and there are not women in their life, to domesticate them. It's some of the most dangerous things. It's one of the most dangerous things in society to have a group of young males, roaming the jungle, and not having any of these buffers in their lives if it can keep them, in order. So this is dangerous for our society to have.
Thank you, Dan, for sharing that. Now, this is this might be new information for some of you. It might be something that you guys deal with every day. And in the time, I wanted to get to Jessica. Jessica's hand's been up.
Oh, hi. Thank you. So this is a great conversation, and some of the stuff that I put in the chat is a little tangential, but I did want to just share it because I feel like some of the comments made related to what more kind of innovative ideas we can think about, like connecting people before, again, it gets to extremes, which is really the nature of what I have, I think, posted as resources that I came across recently through a presentation that was done at UConn. So some UConn folks may have seen this already, but related to just enhanced care clinics, and it's more through the Behavioral Health Partnership. And so again, I think there's limits to who can access this, but I was really impressed with the accessibility, and a lot of this is connected through schools. So it's great in that regard for whoever it might be helpful to. But as a parent of a teenager, I totally understand a teenage boy, what you're talking about. And I feel in that way that a lot of this is just everywhere, and certainly helping to get people more engaged and back to a pre-pandemic, whatever normal that was, is a broader, it's a very important topic, and not waiting for people to get to a place where they need crisis intervention, and what ways can that happen through, what Lisa and Dan had suggested, just collaborating between different generations and kind of finding ways to mentor but ways to sort of structurally facilitate that, because it's hard to just invent this and do much like one person at a time. So really that's the main stuff that I'm sharing. I think it's a great conversation, and the links are really related just to some resources for enhanced care and services that are developing for kids who probably need a bit more intensity in care. But that's
Again, I'm so glad you brought those up, Jessica. I think, individually, so many of us might have resources for families and teens. And I'd like somehow for us, collectively to have that, maybe put something together on the CPA website that's just, resources for family and teens, and that's specific, to these concerns. Are you addicted to gaming? Is your child, addicted to the internet? Just something that we can do to bring our resources together to make it easier to find help.
Sherry, the Public Education Committee for CPA is putting together a huge list of resources. We're trying to completely redo the resource page. So if somebody pulls together a group of these kinds of topics, we're looking to see what's the best way that we can do this that's not going to be too expensive.
That's great.
We have a lot of resources from some programming that Jennifer had already pulled together. So if we have a topic, this is a category that would be spectacular.
Okay, great.
And collaborate with that group. Lisa, you had something else you wanted to share?
I have several things. Sorry, I'll try to be quick. So first of all, with the resources, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but I actually like to provide like Instagram pages and people to follow, because I think that's like one of the most realistic things to actually kind of start getting opposite messaging into kids' brains, and like messaging that we want to get into there, and my brain too. Like I have a totally different Instagram page that I'm not connected with anyone that I know. It's just like positive stuff. And like the guy that I just put into the chat, Mr. Jason Wilson, he's got these like incredible posts about like working with boys. Some of them he does, like, you want to be careful who you suggest him to. Like some of them he does talk about suicide and things like that, which is important, but it just depends on the age of the kid.
And
with
Lisa,
this,
that's the individual who does the documentary. That's what the documentary is about. So it aligns right with that.
You made me think of that. I didn't realize it was him though, but yeah, so he is wonderful. And then I think with the social media thing, this was years ago already, but I did a paper in grad school, like a research paper, and I think it sort of holds up this idea that with social media, like if we're using it as a way to expand our connections, it can be a really positive, powerful tool. If we're using it as our primary way to make connections, I could still see that being positive, but that's where we kind of run into some trouble. So I think just kind of keeping that in mind too, like social media is not like you guys have talked about already, like it's not the enemy, but it's sort of like how we use it. So can we sort of gear it towards these like more positive pages, more connection, and like enhancing connection rather than being the primary aspect of it. I also go ahead.
Lisa, I think to your point, it's like if I didn't have a teenager, I would not know a lot of the sites and platforms that teenagers are on for gaming and hooking up and meeting everybody.
Yeah.
And I think, and that's being a psychologist and I find that knowing the culture, educating myself on the different platforms is imperative working with today.
Yeah, I recommend to parents, like sit down with your kid and watch them play the video game, like sit down with your kid and look at what they're looking at on their phone with them, like engage with that. Like that's a way to connect with your kid, but also sort of learn more about the culture and what they're into. It's like we're trying to fight this thing that is not going away. I do want to offer a little bit more of a positive view of like our future too, because I work with so many like teen boys and like who are just lovely and so in tune and write poetry. And I do think this generation is so much more open to talking about mental health and gender disparity, like all of this stuff. I think they're more woke and they're more like willing to go there. And so I think we have a very long way to go, but I also feel a lot of hope for this generation too. And so I think, that's lovely to see. My last comment is a question for Dan, and then I'll be done. So you're talking about budget cuts. I'm curious about your perspective from within your school system of like, we just had all like these big new bills passed in Connecticut, and allegedly like a lot of that money is supposed to be going towards mental health support within the schools. Being on the ground, like, what are you, if anything, like hearing and seeing about that, Dan?
Well, I am actually a member of the Connecticut's AFC LPAC, which is the Legislative Political Action Committee arm of that. And from experience, I can speak that legislation moves very slowly, and distribution of funds and putting things into place, moves very slowly. So yes, there's a lot of positive emotions about, oh, good, we get some good change coming down the road, but it doesn't feel like it's making a difference right now in my class when one of my kids is having a meltdown right now, or probably next week or next month. You know what I'm saying? But at some point, yeah, there will be some things in place. There will be some more supports and some more resources in place, which is wonderful. So we're all happy about that. You know what I'm saying? There was recently like a bill that was passed about more training for paraeducators and all that, which we were like, that's good stuff, very good stuff. So where's that training for paraeducators? No one's seen it yet. You know what I'm saying? So like, where is it? But it's very slow moving.
Right.
But
And some of it to the good. I was I don't know. I know we have a wonderful legislative committee through APA. We had them talk with us, but recently when I've looked at what the children's law, with the different components, the different statutes, I was taken aback by some of what did pass and I didn't realize had passed this past session. So one of the things could be good if we could understand it, and goes back to what Jessica was saying about getting at things earlier. Other states had passed mental health wellness checks that would be paid for in full by an insurance company. Well, in our state legislation now, for certain insurance companies, I'm not sure if it just means Medicaid because it wasn't clear what insurance companies 2 mental health visits a year have been passed. But I don't really understand that. It talks about, I don't know if it's behavioral health providers, physicians who already in pediatrics do some of that. I'm not sure. So that's one thing I want to check on and something we should know about, because we could promote that for happening, that families could secure a free, no deductible, no copay mental health check. So therefore, maybe we could get at some of these things earlier. And there were a few other things. And to get back to what Dan was saying, there's one was about screening, behavioral health screening. And as of like June or whenever this passed, by January 1st this year, 6 months later, there was supposed to be the Department of Human Health, or I don't know, I'll have to look at what it was to either develop or identify a behavioral health screening tool that could be used by pediatrics. Well, first of all, you cannot develop a screening tool in 6 months and validate it. Identify, we already have tools identified, so I don't really get that. And then they were to be used to diagnose. That's what it says in the law, diagnose. So no screening. So who put this out there? How this got past us, you know, I mean, it's as much my fault or whatever. I really didn't know that was out there. But there are well-intentioned things, you know, so we'll just have to see and get even more involved with our legislative group and see what we can do about some of these things, because it's great. The earlier identification, the prevention will be great interventions here if we could move those forward in a good way. So I know our time is running short. Any last comments? I know Sherry, you might wrap things up, but anybody else have
Thank you so
anything?
much. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Dan and Derek. Your unique and extraordinary perspectives have really enriched this hour. Thank you for sharing your experiences and insights with us. And I'm happy to donate an online workshop or webinar for teens in the state of Connecticut. If CPA wants to do something for parents or teens, I'm happy to do that and work with you on it. And thank you so much for everybody for sharing their thoughts. And this was a really powerful way to start 2023 for our Child and Family Committee meetings. Barbara, do you want to finish it off with something?
Oh, sure. You know, one other thought I had too, there are groups in the state of youth, and we could maybe invite one of those groups to come and talk with us as well, and hearing from the source. I mean, all of you work with so many different youth. Can
Thank you.
represent.
I'm hosting a global teen talk on February 4th for teenagers from around the world.
Oh my.
I'll
Well,
send
get
you the
that
link.
information out to us. But
Yeah, I'll
that
get
would
that
be great.
info out to you, because it's for teens by teens. We really want to hear, it's for kids to hear from other kids around the world. So
Oh,
I'll
that's
send.
cool, Sherry. Thank you.
Okay.
So, and again, Derek, thank you for your time. And Dan, we really appreciate it. And anybody from the committee, just let us know if there's particular topics you would like us to secure speakers on, or just topics we want to just discuss amongst ourselves, and just, you know, kind of tap into each other's expertise. And I just want to underscore what Lainey was saying too about resources. We had talked about this in the past. We had collected some. I know Carolyn was good about doing that, and we can just beef up that effort again for sharing resources. And we can use our little, we don't have a listserv. We can't have a listserv for this committee, but you have everybody's email addresses from the committee on my reminders. So if there is something that you hear about, a resource or a talk, etc., just share it with one another. We don't want to bombard each other, but it's helpful to just know. So heartfelt appreciation for all of you, all of the work that you do. And we look forward to seeing you at the end of February. We'll be back in touch, but don't hesitate to just pick topics as well that you would like to see.
One topic might be the impact of artificial intelligence on all this.
That's a big one, right, Jean? Yes.
Yeah.